Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Ema Roloff, and I've got my friend Meryl with me today, and we're going to be talking about cloud migration strategies. Before I get to the questions that I've got for you, Meryl, can you give everybody an introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. So great to be on here. Emma, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited. We've been talking about this for way too long. So happy to be here. My name is Meryl Weber. I work for a company called Ahead. So we are a partner of a number of different organizations, whether it's in the data center, in the ESM, automation tools, security tooling, et cetera. So really we build digital platforms for our enterprise customers. So cloud migrations, this is a conversation I feel like I'm having daily, and we help out with a lot of our customers' work. So happy to be here and share a little bit of insights.
Great. Thank you for joining me. As you said, we have been talking about this for a while. And part of it is because this idea of cloud migrations is so prevalent across every industry and all of our customers combined across both of us. And a lot of companies might have a few SaaS solutions or here or there have made the decision to bring certain platforms into the cloud. But there are a lot of companies that are still trying to put that enterprise plan together of how do we migrate some of our legacy tools and that type of thing to the cloud. So what do you suggest to your customers as they're looking at that first step towards building that strategy?
Yeah, so I think it's really a two-part answer. So before you do anything, you have to know what's your end game, right? What is that why? What is the answer that you're being asked about or being tasked with? Why do you want to go to the cloud? What does it mean for your organization? So once you can figure out what that end game is, whether it's, hey, example, we're trying to get out of the data center, or we just want to be hands off. We don't want to have the operationalization of some of these things. It'll be easier for us to put certain applications or legacy tools or platforms into the cloud. That might be your answer, or maybe a hybrid approach of both. So the first question is, what's your end game? And when you can answer that, you really have to go to the very beginning and ask yourself, do I know what I have? So do I know, example, where's my infrastructure living? And what are the life cycles of that infrastructure? Because that's going to all tie into the financials in the book. Once you figure out like what the current state is, which by the way, a lot of customers don't have all of those answers, and that's totally okay. Because our partners like Ahead that can help you figure that out with different tooling. But once you know what your infrastructure is, do you know that application layer? And then when you're thinking about a cloud migration, is it going to be, we're going to do everything right away? Probably not, right? So how do you find that low-hanging fruit? And that oftentimes comes from the application. And then furthermore, do you know what applications are talking to one another? So the app dependencies for a migration are absolutely essential. And those are really the components at a very high level that can help you build out your strategy. So really think about, where do you want to be? How can you start there? And do you have that inventory, whether you yourself have it or you need somebody to help you find it? Because it can be a rather long interview process just to dive into everything that you have, especially if you're a company that's looking at divestitures or continuing growth. It's good to have that current state before you start with any sort of a strategy or plan at the end of the day.
It's so interesting that you mentioned that idea of, do you even know what's there? Do you have an inventory of your infrastructure and the applications? And at a surface level, that question feels like it should be easy to answer. But the minute that you get into any sort of large enterprise, there's so many layers and tools and things that are being used within the environment or within an organization, and nasty little idea of like shadow IT and other things that have popped up, and all of these places where stuff could be hiding. It's really important to take that like foundational step to make sure that you've got things ready to go and take the proper planning so that you don't end up down the road realizing that there was this whole area that you unintentionally ignored as a part of your strategy.
Yeah.
So earlier in the first question, I mentioned the idea of legacy platforms. How does modernization and those legacy tools play into this overall strategy? And are you seeing that modernization and cloud strategy are intertwined with one another?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really interesting point. So when you think about legacy applications, you have to do, or tools, you have to do something with it. So at the bare minimum, you really have two options. You can do a lift and shift, which is just taking everything if you can and moving it all together. or you can refactor. And I think refactoring is where, anybody like in IT gets really excited because it means that there's new potential. So you can do that with DevOps, you can do it with CI/CD pipelines, you can do it with automation. The options are endless. But if you're going to take that, what I would say more modernization approach of like moving the puck forward a little bit, it's a bit of a shift in your mindset. So actually, I had a friend who gave me a great analogy for it. And it's really, do you want a pet, or do you have pets, or do you have cattle? The mindset's very different. There's constant care and feeding and daily activity names with a pet that you're not necessarily doing if you have a bunch of cattle. So if you're refactoring and if you're really putting your energy into that approach, you have to make sure that your teams are ready for that. And it can be whether you want to call it a culture shift or just a mindset shift. It should be involved in your strategy because it's not going to happen overnight. So if you can tailor that in and stitch it into maybe more of the middle part of your strategy, so you can get a few quick wins earlier on in the migrations and get your teams used to a different way of operating their environment, then you can really kill two birds with one stone, so to speak, and accomplish both over the entirety of your strategy and be able to scale a little bit faster in doing so.
So now I want to talk about the elephant in the room because I think a lot of times when we are having these like large scale like interview conversations where we're talking about strategy, we don't always take the what's the word I'm looking for? We don't always take the leap, there we go, to some of the financial implications that we know anybody watching this who's like living and breathing this reality is recognizing. So when we move from the traditional hardware and perpetual solution mindset over to cloud and SaaS, there's a financial change that has to happen there. So how do you help your customers get ready and preemptively plan for some of that as well?
Yeah, awesome question. So this kind of goes back a little bit to the first question that we have of like, how do you know what your inventory is and you know those applications and dependencies? So that's going to layer on to what is your current state cost. Some customers are much more CapEx heavy than OpEx. So to your point, the shift is very different from a financial standpoint. So the best thing you can do is have predictability for what your migration strategy is so that you know the end game financials and you can better prepare for it. So an example would be, we call it FinOps. So it's an offering that actually we're talking about with my customers, it feels like almost a daily basis, because you don't want to be in a black hole of IT and then have the financials layered on top of it. So if you can figure out what your current state financials are, we have a mechanism based on all of the interviews that we'll do for app dependencies and better understanding how things are tied together and what the actual cost by an application at the application layer is. We can then put it into different formulas. So if you're going to go to, say, public cloud, whether it's AWS, GCP, or Azure, we can predict what that CapEx or that OpEx cost is going to be for you. So then you can come back and you can have or be more prepared really from a financial standpoint. So you're not shocked with, I have all this CapEx I need to spend and I have no opportunity to spend it because I put everything in the cloud and I've shifted OpEx. It gives that predictability. It really goes back to, what is your strategy? When are you trying to do what? What applications are easier to move and get used to the shift from a CapEx to an OpEx and do it over time so it isn't just ripping a Band-Aid off and then everybody's nervous in the financial world because you don't have the CapEx versus OpEx to really dive into. So
keep accounting as your friends, people. That's the last one. Last one for joining me, Meryl. If you're not already, as always, go follow Meryl on LinkedIn and please let us, either one of us, know if you've got any questions. But thanks again for joining me, Meryl, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Leading Change. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back weekly for more expert interviews on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.